We are excited to have now our second panel on library alignment with state priorities in economic workforce and community development. We are joined by Maxine Bleiweiss, who is the executive director of the Westport Library. She's been executive director of the Westport Library since 1998. She began her library director career at the Public Library in Suffield, Connecticut, and then had an 18-year tenure in Newington, Connecticut at the Newington Public Library, where she was instrumental in creating an innovative, award-winning space and authored a book on libraries as economic drivers in communities through service to businesses. So you understand why she's on this panel. She's served as president of the Connecticut Library Association, which awarded her Librarian of the Year in 2011, and has been a frequent speaker on library issues. The Westport Library is known nationally as a model library with a makerspace, and perhaps we can get a great definition of makerspace on that on this panel. And I want to point out that the Westport Library is one of only 15 national finalists for the National Medal in Library and Museum Services this year. So we wish Maxine and the Westport Library good luck on the final results. We have Elliot Ginsberg, who serves as president and CEO of the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology. Prior to his present position, he served Congressman John Larson as his chief of staff. That followed Mr. Ginsberg's teaching nonprofit and human services administration at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work. And he's got extensive experience in working on human resources issues, including as the Commissioner of the Department of Human Resources for the state of Connecticut under Governor William O'Neill. So welcome. We have Juanita James, President and Chief Executive Officer of Fairfield County's Community Foundation. Before coming to Fairfield County's Community Foundation, Juanita was the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for Pitney Bowes. And prior to Pitney Bowes, she built a progressive 20-year career in the media and entertainment industry with Time Warner and Bertelsmann. She serves on numerous boards in the state and in her community as a big supporter of her community. And we are also joined by Estela Lopez. Estela is the interim provost and senior vice president of the Board of Regents for Higher Education at the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities System. Prior to her current appointment, she served as senior associate at Excelencia in Education, a nonprofit organization committed to accelerating Latino student success. She is also the former vice chancellor of academic affairs for the Connecticut State University System. And then all the way down at the end there, we have Dennis Murphy, the deputy commissioner in the Connecticut State Department of Labor. Dennis is a graduate of Fairfield University and Boston University School of Law. Prior to his appointment at the Labor Department, he served as a neutral labor arbiter with the American Arbitration Association, and prior to that, as Director of Human Resources for the City of Stamford, and Director of Human Relations and Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Bridgeport. And our moderator joining us this morning, we'll welcome John Dankosky, News Director of WNPR and host of Where We Live. He started working in radio back in his hometown of Pittsburgh. Since coming to Connecticut in 1994, he's helped to build WNPR's award-winning newsroom and cultivated one of the most talented news staffs in public radio. He's also, as I've learned from listening to podcasts, an expert on almost everything Connecticut. So he's a great person to have us leading our panel on aligning libraries with state priorities in education, workforce, and community development. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. An expert, certainly not, but I'm really lucky to get a chance to have a lot of conversations with people about a wide range of topics. And actually, libraries in Connecticut is one of my favorite topics. A few years ago, some of you will remember, we did a live Where We Live at a Library Association meeting, and it was funny. I thought it might be a cozy little crowd of 50 people, and there were 500 people in, or something like that. It felt like 500 people. And being a public radio host in a room filled with library professionals, it was like being Bono at a U2 concert. It was the darndest thing. So every time library folks ask me to come back, I'm like, yeah, sure, they like me. And I think one of the reasons is there is this alignment between the way people who are involved with libraries and who frequent libraries, the way they think about their state and their community, and the way we like to on our show. And so that's, I think, a big part of the conversation I want to have today is this idea of alignment, how we're going to align the needs of the state with the things that libraries can do to make the state a better place. And Dennis, I'll actually start with you on this. We talk an awful lot about the workforce of tomorrow, what that's going to be. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you see the state priorities there are, and weave in a little bit what you think the libraries can do to help align.
Well, obviously, technology today is key to understanding. I think libraries, to the extent that libraries can help expose young people to technology when their family situations can't do that, is enormous. You know, as we know, by fourth grade, if students can't, do basic math and understand these issues and read, we've pretty much lost them. And then the Department of Labor gets them at the age of 21, and we try to train them to find a job, right? And, in the last few years, 60 to 70% of all students, high school graduates, entering community college or our state universities required remedial English or math or both. To the extent, and the last discussion was about trying to have preschool, pre-K capturing of these young folks in terms of reading and math skills is enormous for the economy that Connecticut is facing. Our manufacturers require high skills, high technology skills. We still have some old manufacturing in Connecticut, which is successful, and it's terrific, and it's churning along. Healthcare, obviously, is going to be huge. We project going forward in terms of jobs in Connecticut. Obviously, those skill sets are critical, skill sets of math and language skills. So to the extent that libraries can join with the school systems and assisting in gaining those skills, the better. The other thing that I think libraries can do, quite frankly, that we're not doing a very good job at is introducing young people to occupations. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but young people really should be able to see jobs, feel jobs, understanding that manufacturing is not this old, clunky, greasy environment, that it's computer technology. And to the extent that libraries can assist in exposing young people to what real jobs are, goes a long way in them envisioning a future that they can work towards. So generally, those are two general but pretty big topics.
Well, and Estella, I'm wondering if you can maybe pick up on this, because the alignment of the work of our state universities, our community colleges, have been so much around making sure that we have that workforce that Dennis describes. I will say it's been a push and pull with a lot of the conversations we've had, because we don't want to lose the things about learning in college that are so much about self-discovery and so much about trying to figure out what you want to be. But then there's that balance of wanting to create people who have the skill sets to be able to actually go into the workforce. I guess I'm wondering from your perspective about striking that balance, about having universities be a place where people can gain some of these skills that will get them right into a workforce, but then also learn a little bit more about who they are themselves and what they want to be, as Dennis says, when they grow up.
Let me answer in a different way.
Sure.
I think thinking about libraries and what the libraries do in our system, our 12 community colleges, our 4 universities and Charter Oak, I think one of the critical roles that librarians play is the whole information literacy piece. And if you see the students today, no matter where they come from, they're all connected to phones. That doesn't mean they have the skill set to identify the type of knowledge and information that they need to access to learn and to prepare to be the workforce of the future. And I think that's the role the libraries are critical in doing and preparing, to really help them understand what information literacy means, how to access valuable information beyond Wikipedia, and how to then seek the types of sources that they need to prepare, be it to write a resume, be it to do a research paper, be it to an in-depth topic. So I think in the courses, in the professional piece of the colleges and universities, they get prepared with the skill sets they need to perform in that job opportunity. But it is through the library that they acquire that skill set that is such an important skill for lifelong learning.
We mentioned actually in the last panel this question that some have about, well, can Google just replace the library? And obviously not. I remember as a student going to the library because that was the only place I could, get information. Now I think students who are going to your schools have a different problem, which is they're inundated with so much information. The skill of filtering is important, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. How do you filter? It's multi-pronged. How do you filter? How do you go to the source that is valuable? How do you distinguish between, again, Wikipedia, which is the least in-depth one that provides you a superficial knowledge of a topic, but then you go beyond that. And how can you also access that from wherever you are? Because our colleges and universities provide the students the capacity to access that information through their mobile phone, through any other places. So I think that's part of the issue. I think that's the critical role the libraries are playing nowadays. And they also should do it in their communities. To me, the information literacy piece is critical. And how do we evaluate the impact that information literacy has on the students? How do we ensure that it is what we want them to have?
Juanita, why don't you talk about some of the other workforce needs that you see, especially today? We've mentioned some of them, but there are many, many more than we could probably talk about in just 1 hour. What are some things that are headlines for you?
Well, one of the challenges that the Fairfield County's Community Foundation, in looking at our constituents, we realized that we have a significant youth unemployment unemployment problem in the state of Connecticut. As a matter of fact, we have the 17th largest youth unemployment rate in the nation. And when you think about the resources that are available and the opportunities that are available, we really shouldn't have that type of a problem. Where I see both the Community Foundation and what libraries have in common is that we're place-based. We are those trusted partners and advisors within our local communities. And local community knowledge is critical in terms of lifting up a community. The libraries have been, and our libraries have been, real sources of both not only information, but a safe place, and we talked about this a little bit in the last panel, where it's the truly democratic institution, and you see all sectors of the community coming together, being welcomed. And if you go to any one of our libraries, you will find them crowded on any day at any time, and with a range from the preschoolers, toddlers, because they're very active, robust programs for toddlers, to senior citizens. And in the workforce piece, there is a robust support system to help potential job applicants not only research job sectors and where jobs are available, but the library provides these information databases that people can't afford to buy independently. They make those resources accessible to those who are looking for employment opportunities. And they do coaching in terms of resume writing and help them identify how to go about that process that Estella talked about. Where do you find the right information? How do you go about doing that? So the opportunity to identify where the job sector opportunities are, what skills are required, what are the qualifications, and match those up with those who are seeking opportunities is, I think, a really good portion of what the libraries and community foundations can do together.
Since you're talking about being place-based, since we're here in Hartford, and I know that you have some colleagues here from Fairfield County, including a library director here that we'll talk to in a moment, maybe you can place us in Fairfield County for a moment and tell us about specific needs there, about what you see in the workforce, the demographics of Fairfield County that maybe those who don't spend time down there too much might not know.
Well, it's, I think there is a perception that Fairfield County doesn't have needs. And yet,
So certainly in this building, there are some people who feel that. Yeah.
But Fairfield County actually has one of the largest achievement gaps, one of the largest economic and income gaps in the nation, not just in the state, but in the nation. And what we are seeing is we have a robust community college system as well as major universities that can really, in terms of the academic preparation, be very helpful. We also have a robust nonprofit community with a number of programs, whether they're after-school programs, job training programs, preschool programs, everything along the continuum to help residents be successful. But then we have these tremendous pockets of poverty, not just within urban areas like Bridgeport or Norwalk. You have pockets within Greenwich itself that you would be surprised at how high the index is for lack of opportunity for youth. So it is really a place within the state where extremes exist. People don't even understand that we have tremendous food insecurity, for example. You have 40,000 children in Bridgeport who literally are in food insecure situations. So these are some of the factors that impact Fairfield County, and frankly, it's a problem for the entire state. Because if we can't train and educate, keep and retain our young people so that they become the economic contributors and drivers for the state in the future, we will find ourselves very rapidly, one of the fastest growing population segments in Fairfield County are people who are octogenarians. So where's the pipeline for the future workforce to really, stimulate the economy for the future?
I wonder, Maxine, if you can just pick up on that a little bit, because it is one of the struggles that many communities face is you hear Westport and you think, well, what help does Westport need? What services does Westport provide that people need? And this is a prime example of showing how it helps the community there, but as much as in this building we're starting to think more regionally, there is a sense that there's not just a border that you have to stop at, that a Westport Public Library is part of a continuum of Fairfield County that's very important, right?
That's right. Also, Westport Library checks out more books to people from all over the state than just about any other library. So we're happy to do that. Westport swells by about 6,000 or 7,000 people each day who come into work, and they come in from all the surrounding towns. So one of the things that we work very closely with is how are we supporting those people? And they're often coming into jobs that are not as maybe high paying as others might be, whether in healthcare in people's homes or landscaping, whatever. One of our fun collaborations has been to be working with school bus drivers who, for the most part, do not live in the community, but come in and they've been trained in our makerspace on 3D printing so that in the future they have an option of doing something besides driving a bus, that they have a brand new skill. So it's looking for those, it's listening to the community, it's understanding what the issues are out there. I think another thing to be really mindful of is when you have achieved a certain income level and then you're not at that level, it's even harder. You don't know how to operate without having those amenities. And we serve a lot of people who get dressed up every day, come to the library and pretend they have a job, and to keep their spirits up and look for one. And that's a really important aspect too.
Many people here understand what a makerspace is. There are probably other people here who are coming in from the Capitol who don't exactly understand what that. Could you just explain what your makerspace is?
Sure. So little bit of history. One of the things that we were made aware of is the whole taxonomy of learning. And if any of us remember Bloom's taxonomy way back when, it starts with a triangle where knowledge is on the bottom, and it makes its way up where when you show you know something better, you can analyze it, teach it. They've redone Bloom's taxonomy to add making to the top or creating to the top. And then we also see the triangle flipped, So that sometimes you start learning something by making it, by doing a hands-on thing, and you get really interested in it, and then you learn more and go back up to the knowledge base. In 2012, a person from the community said to us, we need a maker fair in Westport. Let's do this like they have in California. So we said, we've learned to only have one-word answers, which is yes. So it's sure, or sure. So we had our first maker fair in 2012 where almost 2,000 people came, and people came with ideas and inventions, and it was a lot of fun, and we're on our 4th year at the end of this month. But from that, one day, a guy who had been one of the makers was sitting in the middle of the library floor and drawing. And we went up to him and said, Joseph, what are you doing? And he said, I have a dream that we have a maker shed in the middle of this library, just like the Wright brothers had. And we build airplanes. So what do we say? Sure. So we went out and got that wonderful private funding that helps you put things together, and a local lumberyard gave us the materials, and we made airplanes. We made half-scale GB fighters. But from that came 3D printers, where, again, someone from the community said, you need a 3D printer, and we said, sure, and got a box within it and gave it to a 16-year-old and said, figure it out, and that's how it all began. But it's a place where hands-on learning takes place every single day, and obviously I can talk about it forever. But what we've learned is that it's a place that where people discover libraries often for the very first time because they never thought the library applied to them because they weren't book learners and they were hands-on learners. And then it turns out that they then taught others, and we can talk more about it later, but as we go on. It's been amazing. And
it's a fascinating thing. Sitting next to you, Elliot, you were nodding your head, and as we look into your world of advanced technology, I mean, this is essentially exactly what we're talking about here, the ability for people to use very advanced equipment that they could never possibly afford themselves in a way that lets them get in on the ground floor. It would seem as though this would be key to building a workforce that we need here, right?
Absolutely, and from the perspective of Westport and other libraries here in Hartford as well, I mean, one of the things that we're most fortunate to be able to do is to help, I guess, have librarians who want to dream and lead to actually perform and showcase the activities that they have and the dreams that they can have come true. So for those who worry about metrics and can you do it, we're very fortunate to be able to bring our staff to libraries across the state, as well as municipalities and school systems, to actually show that those dreams can be made to become a reality, not just a thought, but maybe not. One of the things that we talk about is the idea of certain students learning at a different time in their life. I would just tell everyone, as they all I'm sure know, is that lifelong learning is just something that has to be, no matter whether you come out of a technical high school and go into a job immediately for whatever the reason, or whether you are someone who has 20 years of experience in a corporation. Learning every day is required to maintain that job and, in fact, to grow. So the idea that the library is a place that integrates learning for the youngest to the oldest, in some cases at the same time. I mean, I have experience with family resource centers, which brought together parents and children at the same location. That idea of sometimes having an adult learn at the same time as their child in a facility that is common to both, rather than one going one way or someplace and one going some other place, I think is a plus. The idea that to Maxine's point about maker boxes and the systems, I think we are finding that this new generation is anxious to prove, frankly, that they can do things, some cases, more quickly than any of us would ever imagine our being able to do it, or have the brave opportunity to say, we know we can do something, even if you don't think we can, and prove it. And I think they see examples every day of folks who are doing it and clearly want to have access to it in a place that's common to them and it gives them an opportunity. So the integration of what we're trying to do, and I think what libraries are trying to do and others are trying to do, is important. I would just add that libraries now have to be thought of as a community asset, just as schools and other institutions. I mean, I think there have always been buildings and facilities in a community, but now they have to be thought of as the asset as much as some other things like public safety or economic systems. Because the coordination of those assets, frankly, for the first time, is able to be done through technology where they aren't isolated islands in a community. That's a huge difference between a asset here and a facility over here that couldn't be connected and used and integrated. Now you can.
We've identified a lot of the things, the benefits of what these spaces can do and these programs can do, and how it does align with what we want to create as far as a workforce. I'll ask you first, Elliot, but I'd like everyone to sort of jump in on this. How do we align this with the other state priorities that we have? I mean, you've worked at the federal level, you've worked at the state level, and you've worked outside of government as well. Do you think that the state of Connecticut has the commitment necessary to make some of these alignments? Are we funding these systems the way we should to be able to make sure that these things actually flourish, or are we stunting the growth of these really important projects?
Well, I don't want to speak for what was. I can only speak for what is and where we're moving forward. I believe that everyone has come to the realization that the resources available for each of the assets independently is just no longer going to be there. So what is required is to look at those assets in a collective manner, not just collective within a town, but collective, to you raised it with Maxine, in a region. And the state is certainly committed to regionalization. And in fact, one of the things that I think some of us are trying to have everyone understand at the policy level is that the library system as an asset has to be incorporated into the same questions and demands put on regionalization that are now being asked of other facilities and other common areas within towns. That's going to be a different question because we have a sense of wanting to own things, whether it's a dog pound or a library. But the reality is, how do you integrate your facility in a region that allows it to have assets that can be used by all? In fact, I would just say, and then I'll obviously stop, one of the first regional issues that I think got through that no one even thinks of as a regional issue is the fact that I in Bloomfield can go to any library and take a book out. Okay, not for long, right? Well, we hope that to continue.
Funny you say that, actually.
No,
yeah,
but I think the idea is we didn't think of that as regionalization, at least, and I think we've got to start thinking of these things as how do we integrate. And I know that there are certainly places where budgets are going to be examined, but in terms of maybe changing the paradigm a little, I do believe that it's an asset that the communities have come to understand is important to them, and how does it fit in is an important question. That's the answer.
Yeah, if I may, you're all aware that the system that I work for was recently merged, and you've heard a lot of and read a lot of articles about some of the challenges. But one of the areas that is really working as a system is the library. They are coming together. They realize both the librarians for the 4 CSUs and the community colleges that they have different platforms, that the platforms are not going to be supported, and they are joining forces with the state library to do an RFP in seeking a new platform that would be more affordable, more meaningful, and they're also asking critical questions. How do you manage open sources? How do you share open sources? How do you warehouse when you don't have enough space for your books? So I think the libraries, the librarians, and I have to give credit to them, are really looking at system-wide approaches to do the best they can with the resources that we have and to serve the public the best way. I think that's not known, and I just want to highlight it and commend them. The libraries, if you know the history of libraries, they were seen as very conservative places and when technology came, they were the first one to embrace it and change totally what libraries were into this exciting place where information is accessible and where information can be provided, again, wherever you are and to whoever needs it in the best way. So I'm all for librarians, and I think, again, they should be commended for the work that they do.
Dennis, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, obviously, budget challenges are difficult. When I was Chief Administrative Officer for the city of Bridgeport, a city with great challenges, right? Where do you put the money to make sure kids are safe walking to school with sidewalks that are not busted up with 10-foot weeds? and the police department for safety. And John Arcudi was chairman of the library board, and God bless him, he would say that the state saw libraries so important, they were established with its own title in the law, just like education is. So that we should look at libraries at the same important level as basic education in the state of Connecticut, and that's what the founders saw, which is terrific. And if you've ever put together a budget, as many of you have, you know those are difficult calls. All I might suggest is, and I think it was suggested in the last session, and suggested here, is to build champions, to build cheerleaders.
Exactly.
To stitch together folks that rely on your services, the business communities, et cetera, other government entities, and in that kind of way will have a better chance to be successful in those budget battles.
Juanita?
So when I moved to the state of Connecticut 25 years ago, the first community activity I got involved with was on the board of the local Ferguson Library, which at that time was already a leader and innovator in terms of bringing the internet in and using that and really adopting, being on the front end. And I love the fact that Estelle talked about their innovation and how they embrace technology very early on. And I see that system as continuing to innovate. After the Ferguson trauma, it was the library and the Interfaith Council that convened across the community from all of the different interfaiths, a community conversation about race and where the challenges are. And there's a monthly community conversation about some of the challenges facing, whether it's homelessness, and they can do it in a way where people who don't normally cross sectors can come together and have a conversation. So you will find yourself with a senior corporate official meeting with a grassroots community organizer around a topic that both care about, and our natural systems don't really allow those kinds of interactions on a day-to-day basis. So this question of being a critical asset as part of the community is one that continues. And Dennis, music to our former Ernie DiMattia, who is really not only an absolute civic leader, but his whole mantra was that libraries are as important to education and American democracy as any other institution, and he too had that philosophy that they should be supported. So but where I feel we need to come together is they don't really have the marketing expertise or the budgets to really get that message out. And we find more and more of a disconnect with the people who desperately need and use and really leverage the library services for those who are making the funding decisions. And how many of the people making the funding decisions actually spend time in the library, understand the services, are close to. How many Tony Harps do we have, throughout the region? It is something that those of us who passionately believe in both the mission and the role of the libraries can support.
And one of the reasons I raise it is just because it's very much like the conversation about early childhood. We've often heard that you spend $1 here as opposed to $10,000 or $10 million down the road. And again, investment in libraries seems like fairly small money given the payoff. I know you wanted to jump in.
Sure. I remember 20 years ago in Newington, where we got heavily involved in economic development in the community. Our staff used to go out and make sales calls to businesses to find out what their information needs are. The town manager was impressed by that and gave us library money in the economic development budget of the town because they saw that one could not exist without the other. And I see Arlene Bielfield in the audience, and I remember back when she was president of CLA, she started the infiltration committee. Do you remember that, Arlene? Where it was about librarians getting out into places where they were not normally seen and getting on panels at the CCM conference. And, it's so very local here. Someone pointed out the uniqueness of this town where you could reach and touch just about everybody. Well, we need to use that to our advantage and have conversations, because I bet we could slice out a portion of the budget from the Department of Labor or many other departments.
Could we do that right now? Can we just?
There's not much left to slice.
Well, yeah, well, exactly, and I think that's why this leading question of alignment is just so important, because it seems that it's just we're trying to do so many things in the state, and we see some of the things that work, and I guess to a couple of the things that we've heard here so far. Do you think that there is the willingness, if indeed enough people at the state capitol, decision makers, to actually say, yeah, this is relatively small money, given what we're able to get out of a library system? I mean, do you think that there's willingness to invest in this place?
It's interesting. From a public policy standpoint, for some reason, it is very difficult to make the argument to invest now because it'll pay off later. Do you remember the oil frame commercial? Pay me now or pay me later?
Right.
Well, that works. I mean, sometimes that sells products, but from a public policy standpoint, that's a difficult argument to make for the American population. We're not investing in roads. We're not investing in infrastructure, technological infrastructure, in our children, hence the unemployment rate. So for some reason, that's a difficult argument that we need to grapple with. Your point is well taken and a very good one, and it's a difficult point to get across.
Elliot, how do we make that point? How do we get that point across to people?
Well, I mean, you've asked it in terms of getting direct resources. I guess I would look at it a little differently. There are lots of programs that are funded that have traditionally been located in facilities of that grantee. And I think that, again, going back to the idea of technology, there are, in Hartford, for instance, numbers of programs that would normally go to a WIB that are now located in the library. I think the idea is how do you use the facility of a library as a collecting point for programs where decisions is not so much by the legislature, but decisions by the executive directors or boards of institutions who can place their programming in a central location that has synergy with other locations and prove to them that they're staying alone rather than being part of something bigger with other assets coming in makes a difference to the clientele that they, in fact, want to serve. You could do all the things that a library does if you wanted to, I suspect, at schools, if in fact you thought that was the place. But the fact of the matter is, the school systems aren't built to bring all those kids necessarily at 3 o'clock into a facility. It mixes, elementary schools from one part of the city with another. I mean, it blends the whole issue of what we want to happen in any location together. So part of it is, frankly, the librarian, the head librarians, the boards of libraries to reach out and work with the rest of the community assets to prove that it's not just about direct funding, but bringing those assets in. Because I think in some cases that may be at least an initial, and with technology, it can be done now. That's, I think, the real difference today than 15, 20 years ago.
But I think Estella can speak to this. A lot of the investment that private corporations, other citizens have made in this space, they've made it in some ways in the community college system. They see the value in community college, and the worry, I would say, from some people in the library community is, are those two things at odds for the same amount of money? Are community colleges replicating some of the same work that libraries doing? How can you align these things better?
No, I think we're not, and I think there's a difference because the public libraries are more community centers, and the community college, part of its mission is education. So it does provide access, it does welcome the community, it does have sections for children, but it's a very different type of library, I think. What we have learned and what we're doing is really the notion of working together to find better ways of using the technology and to address questions of the future, e-books. Okay, my daughter the other day lent me an e-book, and for her in Washington to send me an e-book and for me to access it in my Kindle was like discovering America. I felt so proud, and I cannot put that in my resume that I did it. I had 2 weeks to read it. So how do we do those things? How do we share resources, and let me say something because I think it's personal. When I was thinking about this panel, part of the question I asked myself, I grew up in a country that had one library, the National Library, so it was like a monument. We had no such thing as a community library. When I first came as an immigrant, and I am talking because I think the changing demographics of Connecticut is something that libraries need to be very aware of. To go to a library in New York City was for me to go to Disneyland and Disney World. I've been to Disneyland and Disney World, the library is better. The library is better. And every time that I move, I look to where my library is. And I have to acknowledge my mayor of East Hartford because the library is being remodeled and will be opening shortly. And I'm a patron of libraries because I think they represent everything that has been said here. For people like me who've never been faced with what a library is, it is democracy, it is access, it's going to Disneyland or Disney World.
It's a lot cheaper than Disneyland, too. I must say.
Absolutely.
I just want to quickly, if anybody has a question for our panel, please raise your hand, and we've got a microphone floating around, and we'll make sure to get your question there. Just keep your hand raised. Go ahead quickly, Whitney.
I wanted to just say that I think one of the challenges we talked about in the earlier panel is the library's ability to articulate the value and the return on investment. And I think that's one of the areas where community foundations, our community foundation runs a Center for Nonprofit Excellence. And we are in the process of training nonprofits on results-based accountability and how to articulate that value in those metrics. Because the philanthropic sector and state funding and local funding, really everyone is looking for metrics. And it is more difficult to do when what you're doing is transforming society and transforming lives. But as we become more sophisticated at being able to express that value, I think we can help libraries articulate that value and gain the interest so that people realize that return on investment is there. And it's not a hypothetical, there are proven paths to how people not only enculturate into a society, how they learn, how well they do in school, how well they can absorb and learn the English language to have the language skills training for the job sectors that they are pursuing. So all of those things exist, but they exist in anecdotal form, and we have to find a way to pull that information together in a way that we make that business case and heighten the level of awareness and therefore the interest in investing in libraries.
I'm so glad it's so important. Having spent most of my life in the nonprofit world too, we tell our stories and we use metrics so poorly compared to the business world. It really is true. We have a question or a comment from the audience. Hi, what's your name?
Thank you. Chris Bradley, I'm the library director in Norwalk. And this wonderful room, the old judiciary room, is a setting that I think this morning is thick with irony, because it's very difficult to engage in this conversation as we realize that although libraries in Connecticut are funded locally, whether it's 80, 90, 95, they're funded locally, they're loved locally. But we have a few small programs, a few small state programs, two of which we've had since 1976. These are programs of under $1 million that serve the libraries in our state. One, Maxine sort of alluded to, is called Connecticut, and it allows people to use whatever library they would like. People in Connecticut think it's a right. I mean, our library has 10 parking spaces, so people will frequently go to a surrounding library where they can park their car. They enjoy that right. They have no idea that if we lose funding for Connecticut, that's gone. A small program, a simple service. The other is Connecticut. This is when we borrow books from other libraries. When you're doing research, your local library in Colchester, and you want a book that Colchester has no right to buy, the van runs it around the state, okay? That's a little bit in the background. And then we have the vestige of a regional library system. That library started in the 70s, but we have the vestige as a statewide system. And you talk about job help, which is huge for all of us. There's a discount from the Connecticut Library Consortium on an interactive database called Job Now. Other discounts they give us that allow one library to have the buying power of many. But again, these are small grant programs that have been cut in Governor Malloy's budget. And it's just so difficult because it will change the way we have interacted since the 70s. and as I said, these are small programs, so it's hard to keep your mind on the big picture when you realize that come July 1st, our library landscape may change dramatically for want of a few $1 million.
And I appreciate you laying all that out for us because, again, we are going to be hearing from the governor next on the day's events after this panel. And Maxine, maybe you can talk about this. And I raise it as a policy question because if we talk about integrating the state's needs and also some of the things that lawmakers have been spending quite some time on the last couple of years, things like regionalization. Here are a couple programs, she's just enumerated, that point directly toward that makes such a strong case for libraries already doing it. It seems as though there is a case already made for just, again.
Totally. I also think back even farther, John, to Sheff versus O'Neill. With learning happening lifelong, to be able to choose the place that is most able to help you to achieve what you want to achieve in a public library setting is huge. I mean, it's the equalization of education for everybody. So it's so endemic. I think libraries have already catapulted over the 169 town pride or hanging on to that by having these regional systems in place. We are the most cooperative, proprietary people out there. So for any, Dennis, any state funding that comes our way, we would gladly share it.
I'm not the budget guy. So. Thank God I'm not the budget guy.
But we naturally share. I mean, I remember there was a little bit of a kerfuffle when the IRS decided to place tax forms in every public library. And we said, oh my God, but it turned out to be one of the best things because it drew people into the space. Passport agencies, which now have a couple of libraries that they have granted the ability to be in, they should be all over. I mean, we can take on all this in a way that is just incremental to our already having the physical facility and incredible trained staff.
Would you worry in that regard, having to take on things that's not core competency, that goes beyond what you can honestly do because you need to draw people in, you need to make a buck, you need to draw funding?
Well, I see any of those as opportunities. I mean, you're coming in for a passport, so guess what? You can help them with their travel plans and what to do on the road, et cetera, the best databases for learning about travel. You do that with certainly we have always supplied income tax assistance to people who need it badly. So there's barely anything we do in our life that the library can't be co-joined with.
We literally just have a few minutes left. I'd love to get to some more questions from the audience, but I don't think we have time. I just maybe like each of our panelists to quickly wrap up with some thoughts maybe that you haven't gotten to. Elliot, I'll go to you next. Some last ideas to leave us with.
Just what I've said, but others have said, that I think we have an asset that's needs to be thought of as much more of the asset for the community than it has traditionally been, and I think the integration with other assets is its future, and I think to the extent that we think about regionalization, libraries and the idea of the libraries are much more advanced in some cases than communities themselves is important. Just 30 seconds of shout out to the mayor of East Hartford, somewhat because clearly we've watched and seen what's going on in terms of a community using its library, its new library, as a community service. So.
I believe that the libraries continue to serve an invaluable role in building community, and not just because they are welcoming all ages, all ethnicities. I think the library, our local library, has certainly shown its how attuned it is to the needs of different segments of the community. So whether it's creating an app center for toddlers and younger children who don't have access to those kinds of technologies at home because they don't have that kind of economic opportunity at home. Whether it's, there is something going on every night at the library, and it could be a discussion group for our Haitian community or a forum for the Russian community. So it manages to be both very local in terms of reaching all of the individual cultures within our community. We happen to have 53 different languages that are spoken in our public school system. and yet creating the environment where all of that can be blended. It's, to me, the perfect example of the ideals of what this democracy in this country has always stood for. And it is regional because they don't have that selfish. It is a sharing across the entire library systems. Library people are very open to sharing and innovating and doing best practices and bringing that expertise across the board. So again, I think it's more of a messaging. How do we help them articulate the true value that they are really adding?
I will second everything that has been said, but at the higher education level, to continue to work together really as a system to make the best uses of resources. At the local level, the understanding of the changing demographics of Connecticut. We know that at the K through 12 system, 47% of the students are students of color. What does that mean for libraries in those communities, and how do you better serve? How do you make somebody like me believe that your library is Disneyland, Disney World?
Yeah, just unsolicited advice would be, to the extent that you empower others with knowledge, somehow corral that power to support your mission, and that's difficult. And the other thing I think we do need to focus on is making sure we don't replicate services, right? I mean, Department of Labor, we're there for job training skills, resume writing skills, et cetera. To the extent that you work hard to get a grant to do that, well, we're already doing it. So maybe find something else to support those kinds of systems. So that just being aware of what everyone is doing, I think, is important for our resource allocation.
We could do another whole hour panel on just that last thing you said. Because that is fascinating. But it's truly one of the things I'll just leave you with that I struggle with all the time in our conversations is that we do have a lot of people in 169 communities doing a lot of the same things, and the ways in which we can work together to do it better, I think makes a lot of sense. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you folks for coming and taking part in this conversation. You do wonderful work. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. Now we're going to do a fast break to the other end of the hallway. This is Connecticut, so I know everybody here knows what a fast break is. We're going to fill up our plates and take a seat. Our goal is to be seated by 12:15, which is when we expect Governor Malloy to come in to give his remarks. I do ask that everybody take their belongings with them because this room will be reset for the afternoon roundtable portion. So we need to make sure that you have all of your belongings and nothing gets left behind. Thanks.